Mayor White, thank you for doing this interview with us. Where we want to start is really with your youth in Glenville, and tell us about the 1960s and maybe a little bit about the 65 election and the 67 election of Carl Stokes.
I grew up in Glenville, lived almost my entire life there. In fact, other than college, I was in Glenville for 51 years before moving out to a farm. Great memories, great neighbors. Everybody was your mother, everybody was your father. Now, there's some good for that, and there's some not so good for that if you're not always wearing your halo as an angel. But it was like any neighborhood in those days. Everyone got up in the morning and went to work, came home, we had dinner. We enjoyed the chit-chat over the picket fence lines when the laundry was flowing. I can remember really the first time I ever saw Carl Stokes. He was on a 19-inch black and white TV. I'm sure some of your youth are now saying, oh, they actually had just black and white. But he was running for mayor. I was 13 years old. I was quite a bit of wallflower. I wasn't the engaging, go for it kind of person people thought I might have been. But for some reason, I was mesmerized by seeing him on TV. And instantly, believe it or not, at the age of 13, I decided that I wanted to be mayor of Cleveland. And I actually spent the next 25 years chasing that dream. And my mother always said I kind of had tunnel vision, or a one-track mind, I think she said. But I chased it and tried to prepare myself to be as good a mayor as I could. And when I thought it was my time, I ran.
So tell me about 1967 and when Carl Stokes was elected.
I'm sure when you think about Carl Stokes' election, I think the first thing that comes to mind is living vicariously through someone else's experience. Of course, at that age, I wasn't able to go to the celebration or any of those things, but you saw quite a bit on the news. It was, after all, a historic moment to see the election of an African-American mayor in a major American city in America at that time. So I think it cemented even more my desire to pursue this outcome. And believe it or not, I actually followed quite a bit. I mean, if you can imagine a 14 and 15-year-old being focused on the news, I know that's hearsay today, but every day, focused on the news and what he was doing and how he was doing it, and how it was being received, how his actions were affecting others. It's interesting because I think before this interview, I never thought that it was really a great laboratory of learning. I was the only one in the class, and I absorbed it as best I could, as a 14 or 15-year-old could absorb anything.
Tell us about Ohio State and you're going there and what happened there.
I have never said this publicly, but you think about what people may know of me in terms of things I was involved in at Ohio State, but I was not what I would call a joining person at Glenville High School or in my life up to that time. I had been working since I was 13. I've actually worked, I'm 61 now, I've actually worked all my life since I was 13. And so joining and those kind of things that come with the joining of the clubs, I either didn't have the time or the interest because I was doing some other things. So I arrived at Ohio State, first in my family to ever go to college. And to be quite frank with you, it was an amazing moment because you have this black kid who grew up in Glenville. The only white people he ever saw were teachers and policemen. He arrives at Ohio State, which is truly a microcosm of America. And it never dawned on me at the ripe age of 18 that the Glenville I lived in wasn't kind of the norm. But I got to Ohio State and I learned very quickly that it's a big world out there. And there are a lot of people. They don't all look like me. They don't all think like me. They don't all like grits with butter and sugar on it in the morning. And for me, it became a challenge, but at the same time, an opportunity to learn how to make my way in a much larger society, which wasn't always, that giving or that sensitive to my particular needs.
So you ran for student council president,
Student
right?
body president, yes.
So tell us about that.
Well, through a quirk of fate, I ended up being a leader in the movement in 1970 at Ohio State, which was an amalgamation of students looking for more African American students, more African American teachers. We also were aligned with people who wanted to do such things as end the war in Vietnam. If you can remember, Michael, you can remember back that far, the Vietnam War. I can. So it was an amalgamation. It was actually a strike on the campus. And without boring you to tears, I ultimately became a leader of that effort and was ultimately suspended from Ohio State and arrested, quite frankly, and ultimately reinstated in the campus court, all charges except one being dropped. And I went on with my life until I became a junior, decided to run for student body president. When I returned to campus, I became the leader of the African American organization, but I wanted to see if, this black kid from Glenville could become the president of the student body, where there were 50,000 students and only 250 of them looked like him, which is, as you might think, if you just look at those numbers, that's quite a daunting task. Not bad for the son of a factory worker and a part-time secretary. So I want to make sure that I keep a clean tongue in this interview. So let me just say to you that it was a time of great involvement. It was a time when our generation was exhorting everyone to be involved. It was Woodstock, it was Jimi Hendrix, it was all of that. And so we actually put together, in fact, this is where I truly learned coalition politics. Because I quickly figured out that if I was going to be the black guy running, then I was going to be the black guy losing. So I tried to put together an organization called Student Coalition, where we basically sought not just blacks, but we sought other people who thought similar to us. It could be the war, it could be lower tuition, but kind of a general view. We actually had Democrats, Republicans, we had long hairs, we had short hairs, we had rich people, we had poor people, and of course we named it Student Coalition. And that was the very first time that I ever tested out the theory of coalition politics. And just about every campaign I ever ran after that, I always tried to pursue that philosophy of trying not to just have my tent, but I wanted a bigger tent with people of like mind. So we're in this period. It's early 1970s. We had no money, no theme, but a candidate. So we actually decided to come up with a slogan. Every campaign has to have a slogan. You can't succeed without a slogan. So after quite a bit of beer and quite a bit of time, we came up with a slogan of give a, and I won't finish that comment, but in those days when you're 19 or 20 years old, you could actually say those words in public on the campus at Ohio State. So now we had our slogan, give a blank. But we had no money. Now we have a slogan and a candidate, but no money. We actually, Michael, liberated toilet paper from the dorms all over Ohio State. Went down in the basement. We bought these $3.99 stamps. And we stamped give a blank on each individual piece of toilet paper. And we went out, and that was our campaign literature. It was unique. It was direct. It was impactful. And we won. A brand new campus political party winning by 1,000 votes was, not an easy task to achieve. But I learned a lot in that campaign, and I will tell you just very briefly, Michael. The lessons that I learned in that campaign stood with me through 15 more campaigns as an adult. Never let money be the determining factor in an undertaking. Don't wait to have 100 people at your beck and call to move forward on something if it's a righteous thing that you want to do. exhort people to think bigger, to think more of what they can achieve on their own, challenge them to be bigger and better. Be in their sphere. Be with them, talk to them, trade dreams, trade expectations, trade hopes, and keep trying to make that tent as large as possible. And all those things I learned in that race. And it even carried me over very quickly. It even carried me over to when I was president of student body, because I did something that wasn't quite understood, and I'm sure people didn't quite like it. Why is this 21-year-old bearded black kid with a big fro from Cleveland developing a working friendship and relationship with the president of Ohio State University? Isn't he the enemy? But we actually got to know each other. I think we got to like each other. I know I liked him. But more importantly, we actually delivered on some things together that were, I think, pretty impactful. Like the discussion we had as to why the Ohio State-owned bookstore charged as much as the private bookstore. And that discussion and investigation led to a 5% discount for all Ohio State students at Ohio State bookstores. A big thing for us in those days, it won't mean a lot to young people today, but beer in the dorms. I wasn't a huge beer drinker, but beer in the dorms, co-ed dorms, were things that in my generation, were important. But they came about not because we were standing outside throwing bricks through the windows. We always had the option. But they came about because we were willing to put our arm across the aisle, so to speak, sit down with, people could be our parents, and do it in a way in which we were heard and respected. And so I learned all those things through that campaign, and I must tell you that I always try to never forget them.